Hey everybody, this is the Free Will Science and Religion podcast. My name is George Ortega. I'm here with Chandler Klebs, Alan Worrell, David Joseph, and Trick Slattery. And today we're going to talk about why and how overcoming this belief in free will is helpful not just to society in general, but on a personal level. How it'll help us kind of like navigate our relationships with our friends, family in much more civilized, compassionate, and intelligent ways. Okay, Chandler, you want to start us off?
Sure. Here's an example of how understanding that you don't have a free will and that you're not fundamentally responsible for the way your life turned out and what you do and how you feel and all that. It has so many benefits that lead you to happiness that it's hard to know where to begin. But here's the start. First of all, you understand that you're not responsible. You no longer feel guilty like, oh no, I'm a bad person deserving of punishment. And that's an important thing right there, because if you feel like that you if you feel like you deserve to be punished, well then you'll either punish yourself or you will let other people punish you for things, whether they're wrong or not. Well, then, so you take abuse as well as you abuse yourself when you feel that you deserve bad things to happen to you. And so that's a really bad thing. And so it's by understanding that, wait a minute, even though I may have done things in the past that were not the right thing, I've made mistakes, punishing myself, well, that doesn't help anybody anyway. It not only does it not help anyone if somebody punishes themselves by committing suicide or something. Besides the fact that it doesn't help them, they don't deserve it. And when they realize they don't deserve it, their whole worldview changes.
That sounds great. David, do you have any kind of so this is Chandler, you're just dealing with like how this helps ourselves, like in other words, like to prevent us from punishing ourselves. And again, like it's very important to prevent us from allowing others to punish us. David, can you think of like ways like that on the other side of it, like how does understanding that we don't have a free will help you to understand and be more compassionate toward other people?
One of the main comments I seem to get would be kind of along the lines of you're just using the excuse of having no free will, so you don't feel bad about anything that you've done. But I think for me, if I'm in a car and I run someone over, just because I don't have free will doesn't mean to say that I'm not going to feel bad about what's happened. But with regards to what you're saying, I would say that it helps us to be more understanding, concentrate more on the root causes of people's behaviours rather than just asserting that they have free will and punishing them for something that was beyond their control. If that makes sense.
Exactly. I think that's a really important point. In other words, like understanding that we don't have a free will does not mean that we're going to give ourselves license to do whatever, and does not mean that we're going to not feel bad when the universe compels us to do things that we'd rather not do, that we wouldn't do if we had a free will.
Exactly.
Okay, Trick, can you relate this to your personal life? How this helps you kind of like on a daily basis to kind of like, to just enjoy life better without going to the free will belief.
Oh, definitely. I mean, the whole idea that someone isn't to blame or really truly responsible in the sense that they could have done otherwise leads you to have the more compassion towards other people. If someone gets angry at you, you kind of understand that there's these causal influences that have led up to that anger, and it kind of helps you not project anger back if when possible. Sometimes even the best of us, we still have problems with that, right? We still sometimes don't recognize this free will illusion. So we kind of play to these things. But then when we think about it in hindsight, we understand that these causal events happen and they couldn't have happened otherwise. And the person wasn't to blame for their state of being at any given point. They weren't guilty or anything like that. And I think another thing besides this is it also plays into our idea of fairness and equality. When we understand that one person isn't really technically more deserving or less deserving than another person, it kind of takes away the justification for inequality and being unfair. Basically, it removes that justification and says we're better off trying to equalize things amongst all members.
Right, so that definitely relates to like our societal view. In other words, like there's a lot of income inequality, a lot of inequality in various ways across society. So how would that play out on a personal level? How would that understanding help us relate to people, as we meet them on the street and all?
It removes the idea of that you're kind of this egocentric idea, I guess. The ego that makes you think that you're above others or even that you're below others. It removes that idea and it kind of lets you relate to people as an equal.
Excellent, excellent.
That's
Alan, you just, relatively recently you came, I think, to the understanding that free will is impossible. So how have you noticed in your personal life that it has enhanced your relationships and maybe also kind of like shielded you from negative emotions that you would have been experiencing under the free will belief?
So, and I'm going to kind of take a couple of points that's already been mentioned, and to use a concrete example, let's take poverty. Right, one of the biggest arguments that I always hear is that people are poor because they choose to be poor. It's completely, it makes no sense, but hey, that's what they say. So for myself, arriving at that point, it really begins for me taking a look at that person and saying, okay, why are you in the situation that you are in? And what are the things that can help you get out? Because it's a realization, I think, about choices, and not only choices for myself, the things that I don't know, but also choices for other people, what they don't know. So if that person doesn't know that perhaps there are programs available to help them get out of poverty, right, then they may never take those programs and thus use those programs and get out of poverty. So it's more of this perspective, this changing of education, I suppose, to where we may not drive down a car or drive down the street and hit someone and cause pain, but it's this helping other people to see other choices and perhaps stopping, taking a step back and going, okay, I'm going to make this decision, i.e. I'm going to drive my car way too fast today. Well, what are my other options? And if I don't know what my other options are, how can I find out my other options? So can I ask someone? Can I get a different perspective from someone else? It's this expanding of perspective that I think helps when coming to a realization that free will isn't just an illusion at the end of the day. But it's this understanding that, yeah, I may have choices. So which one do I take?
Alan,
which way do I go?
Absolutely. And then so basically that also affects how we look at that person. For example, like black people in America, a lot of people will, have these racist views, blaming black people for their poverty, looking down on them. And it's not just about the choice, because to the extent that we understand that we don't have a free will, we understand the reason that so many black people are poor relative to white people is because of the legacy of segregation and slavery and all.
And there are still things today as well that happen. If you raise a child, let's say, who's for them, the thought of college is so far out of reach that it's not going to be done. And it may be that, something's going on at home, or just in general, the community that they're in is depressed, is down. Those options do not seem available. Then that child may never go on to try to find those options for themselves, just because they don't know that they're available. And if you can look at that and say, okay, well, maybe number one, we make those options available, and number two, we try to help those people, try to educate those people, try to shepherd them into getting those resources and doing better for themselves, then that's one way to break that cycle of poverty. On the flip side, if you say, well, they have a choice and they just don't choose it because they're lazy, because they're this, they're that, whatever, then you just completely wrote off an entire segment of people who you could educate and help them become, more than what their parents were.
Yeah, I think the problem is that people actually blame those people for being poor, and they see those rare cases where a poor person actually builds themselves up out of this poverty and into a wealthy state or something like that, and they say if they can do it, then these other people should be able to do it. But they don't have the same causal variables, and that's what the people don't really seem to make that connection.
Right. Yeah, and they don't have, they just, yeah, like you said, they don't have the same causal variables. And it's for other people to come in and make those changes for them to help them along the way. Of course, you can't do that if everyone sits on their hands and say, well, they're just doing it because they choose to live that kind of lifestyle.
Right. Or because they're lazy, that's the thing. Oh, these people are lazy. They don't want to work, when in actuality, they probably can't find a job at McDonald's. So it's like, yeah.
Well, and even if they did find a job at McDonald's, does the job at McDonald's pay more or is better for them than the alternative of doing nothing?
Exactly.
Guys, I want to plug two books that deal with this, more sociologically, but the first, one of them was just published earlier this month. This guy, James B. Miles, an academic and independent researcher in the UK, he just published a book called The Delusion of Free Will. Or Chandler, is it the Free Will Delusion?
And then I think the subtitle is How We Settled for the Illusion of Morality.
Excellent. So yeah, so this like I just read it, and he presents exhaustive evidence that like our whole social structures based on this free will belief are designed to keep people poor. That to kind of like this free will belief says, well, they have free will. It's up to them. It's not our fault. So this is majorly important. And so again, it's a great book. Another book that was incidentally published, I think about 100 years ago. I don't remember the author's name, but it's called In Defense of the Bottom Dog. And this is the most impassioned, compassionate defense of people who were oppressed by the free will belief that I've ever read. I mean, like, again, it was written 100 years ago, so it doesn't go into the science. It definitely refutes free will by logic, but it presents the rationale. It presents the rationale why this is so important for the world to know. Okay, Chandler, let's pull back into our personal lives. Like when you're watching people on TV or people in our lives, like for example, I've got a couple of brothers, like older brothers, that they don't treat me sometimes very well, and like I may want to avoid them, but it helps me to not have to blame them. How does this free will belief just basically how does overcoming the belief just enhance our relationships?
Well, what's interesting is what I found is that it hasn't really enhanced my relationships, because I don't have any relationships with anybody. What I'm saying is, for example, let's just say that my sister and my father are people that I can't be around, okay? And so that hasn't really changed since overcoming the free will belief. But what has changed is I no longer hate them the way I used to. Because I used to, hate them and blame them for being the kind of people they are, blame them for being selfish or and stuff like that. And it's little stuff like that that I no longer am burdened down by that hatred of of you know of believing that they could have done otherwise and being mad at them for it. So that's the thing, is I'm no longer mad at whether it's my sister or my father or the people in churches that I've known who have hurt me really bad. I no longer hate them because I don't blame them. It doesn't mean that it hurts less or that I wasn't damaged by what happened in the past, but at the same time I realize that they had no choice but to do what they did. And all it really does is it motivates me to do what I can to prevent other people from following the same path those people have.
Okay, yeah, because I can relate to that. In my experience, it's not an insignificant effect. I mean, in other words, like, yes, with my brothers, with certain politicians that say hateful things. I was into politics, like, a lot several years ago, and I would hate groups of people and all. And so, yes, to the extent that we understand that it's not their fault, logically, I would feel ashamed to kind of like to hate them and hold them responsible, and that's a huge benefit. That basically spares us this anger and this judgment and this hatred. And so yeah, it doesn't solve everything. Obviously, like, well, fine, we don't blame them, but then like I mean, like, actually, Trick, talk about this, because like if you have an atheist perspective, you actually come to the point where you can't blame anything, and that's got to be a wonderful benefit.
Yeah. And you're right. This whole hatred idea, this whole emotion of hatred, the whole free will belief kind of justifies hatred, whereas it kind of leaves the lack of belief kind of removes that justification for hatred, and it kind of leaves these other emotions such as love pretty much unscathed. It doesn't really have any rational bearing on those emotions, but it has them on things for hatred because there's really no reason to be hating something that couldn't have done otherwise, basically.
Can you go into more detail? Because sometimes people will say, well, if you get rid of this free will belief, then that means I can't freely choose to love someone. So that means like there is no love and stuff. So explain how that's like illogical reasoning.
It's illogical because love comes about through causal means. We develop relationships with people through causal means. We become psychologically connected, I guess, with people through causal means. It's a whole causal process that leads to love, and the same thing with hatred. There's a whole causal process that leads to hatred as well. But then when you start thinking about both of these things on rational levels, on logical levels, you understand that the love isn't unjustified by the lack of belief in free will, whereas the hatred kind of is because the person wasn't to blame for whatever they've done that made you hate them. So
yeah, and I could add to that, like, for example, I think people know like that we don't choose freely who, for example, to fall in love with. When people like fall in love and get married, I mean, that's not a free will decision, yet they still love the people. Because if we did have free will, then we'd all kind of like just like, well, that seems like a good person. I'll fall in love with that person, whatever. So it solved a lot of problems. But like, so basically we have this understanding, like with love, no, it's not a freely will thing. Go ahead.
And I would say too that just because you don't believe in free will, say you get rid of the free will belief, it does not change the fact that we are a social species who look to prop up each other, help each other, and all of these things. What it does do is it gives you pause to look at the person and say, okay, why are you acting this way? And you begin searching for those causes and those things to change rather than just blaming them because they did what they did. So it's a shift in mindset to look for root causes rather than, just writing off and saying, oh, well, they did what they did because they made that choice. It's a different way of looking at other people.
Right. And sometimes it just allows us to understand that two people might just simply be incompatible in their psychologies. So these causal events lead to two people that are incompatible, and that's that. It doesn't necessarily mean that one has to be changed or the other has to be changed. Though we can look for changes, the ways to change for things that are really bad. But I think we can also see that the way people come about causally can be incompatible with the way other people come about causally, and it doesn't necessarily mean one is worse than the other. It just means that they're just two incompatible psychologies that came about.
Yeah, and if both people realize that and recognize it, then they could work and try to come up to some kind of an agreement that says, okay, this is what I'm expecting from you. What are you expecting from me?
Right.
And then try to actually overcome that rather than simply blaming each other and never trying to work for a solution that's more than what they would get if they don't. So
yeah.
That's why. Sorry, go ahead.
It's definitely a heightened awareness of other people and why things are the way they are.
Right. Yeah. It was. I was going to say that's why we have high levels of divorce rates and stuff like that. I mean, you can be in love with someone one day, but if they cheat on you, then that's like a causal effect. The next day that person is someone you perhaps don't like so much.
Yeah. Wow. This is really kind of weird to listen to, because this whole falling in love thing is kind of a strange thing, because growing up I heard two messages. I heard love is a choice and that you must choose to love people or God will send you to hell or something weird like that. But then at the same time, you hear people tell their experiences like, well, I didn't choose to love. I didn't choose to fall in love. It just happened, and it's kind of interesting because it gets confusing anyway, because the concept of love is about as hard to explain as how free will could exist. I mean, I'm kind of sort of a love illusionist, where I think that I don't know. I don't. I mean, I guess at the very most, I think of love as being synonymous with liking or favoring, like liking the taste of one food over another. I can't on any level above that connect what love could be.
Well, let's demystify love, because I think love sometimes gets very conflated, confused with a lot of things. I think essentially, you might love a car, right? And the car will benefit by your waxing it and taking care of it, right? But for human beings, if you love another person, I think essentially means is you have a concern for that person's happiness. Your love is a reflection that, in other words, like you want that person to be happy. I don't think it's any more complicated. It's like with to the extent we love ourselves, love is really that perspective, that motivation that expresses a concern for our welfare.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's kind of a simplified definition that I could think works well enough. But yeah, I want everyone to be happy, therefore I love everyone by that definition, sort of. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it would seem though that the definition would change if, you were perhaps the definition you just used of I love everyone versus say I love, my spouse or I love my significant other. It seems to me that the context and the definition would have to change between those two situations. They would be completely different situations. But I'm not sure how you would define love in that context versus another. Because I would think, and I'm not married, so I can't speak to it, really. That you're not only concerned for your partner's well-being and happiness, but you also have a connection there that you can no longer really see your life without them in it, to some extent. So, which is kind of an interesting sort of deal. So
it's just a stronger emotional level, basically, than loving ice cream.
I think of it in terms of connection. I think of it, the more you know somebody, the more important they become to you. So in a way, yeah, you would say that, I might like the taste of ketchup, but yeah, I mean, I'm gonna eat the ketchup and it's gone, you know. But the person, like other humans or, you know, other animals as well, some people have a dog or cat or pig or something that they have with them for years. And for them, that pet dying is much worse than if one of the humans in their life dies, you know, because they, yeah. And so that's something, yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Something, it's long term. It's more long term. This isn't just some temporary thing. Like you know, ice cream or ketchup or whatever.
Or perhaps even, I would go so far as to say you could include other people in that too, right? So maybe friends, family, etc. People who you may not be close to, i.e., coworkers, right? Who, if you left your job, that would be a different reaction to, say, your wife or your pet passing away. Right, those could be two different.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting though is the one way in which all of these relationships are the same is that we had zero choice in all of them. That's what's so funny, because I mean, for example, I think most people get that they didn't choose their parents. You know, I think most people get that. That's pretty obvious, even for free will believers. But then, and also, like, I don't choose my coworkers at Hy-Vee. I mean, I'm not the one who sets that up, you know. But then a lot of people, they say, well, you choose your spouse. Some people say that you choose who you fall in love with. They choose who you marry. But I don't really think it works that way. I mean, because well, we know there has to be a cause for everything, and it usually works out because people end up meeting somebody who has all the qualities that I guess they're attracted to, or whatever you call it, you know. So it's just, you know, it's pretty much inevitable that they're going to meet somebody like that.
Yeah. And I think to take this back to what we were talking about, we got to understand that these emotions, there's tons of emotions that we all have, you know, empathy and all these different emotions. And some of them, the understanding that we don't have free will, it just doesn't really touch them is I guess the key point. Whereas other ones, such as hatred or things that kind of depend on this idea that someone is blameworthy, kind of makes that emotion a little less justifiable, I guess, is the way to put it.
Absolutely. That's important, because like ordinarily, we've got about a minute left and all, but ordinarily we kind of like are understanding and try to be non-judgmental out of a moral principle. You know, it's a good thing to do, but to the extent that we understand that nobody has a free will, it not only becomes the right thing to do, it becomes the only logical, rational thing to do. All right, guys, this has been a great discussion. We've got a little over a minute left. So basically, yeah, the idea is like, even with love, I mean, if we want to love people more, you know, love the people in our lives more, the world more, people in general, to the extent that we overcome the belief in free will, we overcome judgment. And when we're not judging people, it's much, much easier to love people. And so, like, you know, that's a powerful benefit to the rest of the world. All right, this has been this Free Will, Science, and Religion podcast, and we're going to revisit this again, you know, a lot, because again, it's not just understanding that free will is impossible. The second step, and it's a crucial step, is to put it into practice by integrating it, to really reprogram reprogram ourselves from this, like, you know, very deeply ingrained belief in free will to the proper understanding so it benefits us all. Okay, thanks everyone.